Did you know that the Bible you read today is actually missing entire chapters of ancient human history? Did you know that early believers were reading sacred texts describing how King Solomon used a magical ring of power to physically enslave demons to build his temple? Or how Adam actually had a rebellious first wife before Eve who escaped the Garden of Eden to become the mother of all dark entities? What if I told you there are hidden ancient scrolls detailing the exact names of the 200 fallen angels who landed on Mount Hermon, complete with a list of the forbidden ancient technology they traded to early humans? None of these stories are internet conspiracy theories. They are written in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek texts that were once studied, revered, and preached from by the earliest generations of humanity. But today, you won't find them anywhere in the standard 66 books of the Bible. Somewhere along the timeline of history, powerful men in religious councils sat behind closed doors, debated the terrifying contents of these ancient scrolls, and decided that they were simply too dangerous for you to read. They labeled them Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, and heresy. They ordered the books burned, and they ordered the history erased. But you cannot permanently erase the truth. While the official church councils were busy censoring the scriptures, rebel monks, desert scribes, and secret sects were frantically hiding copies of these banned books. They sealed them in clay jars and buried them deep in the desert sands of Nag Hammadi in Egypt. They hid them in the pitch-black caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea. They smuggled them into the isolated, impenetrable mountains of Ethiopia, where the church authorities could not reach them. And over the last century, archaeologists have been digging them all back up. In this full hour-long documentary, we are going to unlock the vault. We are bypassing the religious censorship of the ancient councils and looking directly at the source material. We will uncover the Book of Enoch and the horrifying reality of the Nephilim giants. We will decode the alphabet of Ben Sira and the legend of Lilith. We will read the Gospel of Judas, the Testament of Solomon, and the terrifying visions of the afterlife that were deemed too graphic for the public. These are the most dangerous banned books of the ancient world. To understand the magnitude of this cover-up, we have to start with the most famous, most fiercely debated banned text in human history, the Book of Enoch. If you read the standard book of Genesis, Enoch is a massive, glaring mystery. He is introduced as the great-grandfather of Noah and the seventh generation from Adam. But unlike everyone else in the early genealogies who simply lived and died, Genesis 5 gives Enoch a terrifyingly cryptic exit. It simply says, Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him away. He didn't die, he was physically removed from the earth. But Genesis never explains where he went or what he saw. For centuries, Western civilization thought the full story of Enoch was lost forever. The early church fathers knew about his writings, and even the New Testament book of Jude directly quotes from him. But by the 4th century, his prophecies were deemed too radical, and the book was systematically hunted down and destroyed by the mainstream church. It was entirely erased from the Western world. That is, until 1773. When a Scottish explorer named James Bruce discovered that the isolated Ethiopian Orthodox Church had secretly preserved the entire intact Book of Enoch for over 1,000 years. And when scholars finally translated it, they realized exactly why the early councils were so desperate to burn it. The Book of Enoch answers the darkest, most terrifying mystery in the entire Bible, Genesis chapter 6. In the Standard Bible, Genesis 6 contains a bizarre 2-verse glitch that describes the sons of God coming down to earth, mating with human women, and giving birth to a race of giants known as the Nephilim. The mainstream Bible drops this massive bombshell and then immediately moves on to the story of Noah's Ark, offering zero explanation. But the Book of Enoch doesn't skip over it. Enoch dedicates entire chapters to explaining exactly who these sons of God were. They were the Watchers. According to the banned text, God assigned a legion of towering, terrifying angelic beings to simply watch over early humanity. But 200 of these watchers became obsessed with the beauty of human women. Led by an entity named Samyaza, these 200 angels descended onto the peak of Mount Hermon. There they bound themselves by a dark blood oath, swearing to abandon the kingdom of heaven, take human wives, and completely corrupt the human bloodline. They didn't just fall from grace, they staged a calculated supernatural rebellion. And the monstrous giant children they produced were only the beginning of the nightmare. The Book of Enoch reveals that the terrifying giant offspring of the Watchers were only half of the problem. When these 200 fallen angels descended to earth, they didn't just corrupt the human gene pool, they systematically corrupted human civilization. According to the banned text, these entities traded the guarded secrets of heaven in exchange for the daughters of men. They artificially accelerated human progress by introducing what the text describes as forbidden technology. Before the Watchers arrived, humanity was living in relative simplicity. But overnight, the ancient world was introduced to weapons of mass destruction, dark sorcery, and vanity. Enoch gets incredibly specific about exactly which angel taught what. The text singles out a terrifying watcher named Azazel. Azazel taught humanity the art of metallurgy. He showed men how to mine the earth to forge swords, iron knives, shields, and breastplates. Before Azazel, war was primitive. He introduced the organized slaughter of the sword. But he didn't stop with men. Azazel taught women the art of deception and vanity, introducing the making of mirrors, bracelets, and the use of antimony to paint their eyelids. He fundamentally altered human psychology, introducing the concepts of seduction, jealousy, and greed. And Azazel was just one of the leaders. The leader of the rebellion, Samyaza, taught early humans the dark arts of enchantments and root cuttings, introducing witchcraft and sorcery to the world. Another watcher named Barakijal taught the reading of the stars and astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. A watcher named Penemu even taught humans the bitter and the sweet, and showed them how to write with ink and paper, something the angels claimed was never meant for humanity, as it allowed deception to be recorded and passed down through generations. They handed primitive humans the loaded weapons of the gods. The results were apocalyptic. The Book of Enoch states that because of this forbidden knowledge, godlessness increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. The earth became a nightmare of violence and bloodshed, fueled by angelic weapons and dark magic. And to make matters worse, the massive Nephilim giants were rapidly multiplying. The text describes how these towering hybrids quickly consumed all the food and resources that normal humans could produce. And when humanity could no longer feed them, the giants turned around and began to eat the humans. The earth was quite literally being devoured. As the Nephilim giants devoured the earth and the Watchers corrupted human minds with dark magic, the Book of Enoch describes a terrifying, desperate moment. The souls of the slaughtered humans literally cried out from the ground, begging the heavens for justice. The text says that the four great archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, looked down from the sanctuary of heaven and saw the earth soaked in blood. They saw the horrific genetic mutations and the weapons Azazel had introduced. Horrified, the archangels approached the throne of God to present the case of a dying humanity. The divine response was swift, and it was absolute. God did not just send a flood. He ordered a coordinated, supernatural military strike against the fallen angels. According to Enoch, the Creator handed out specific, brutal missions to his top commanders. Uriel was dispatched to warn Noah of the coming global reset. Gabriel was ordered to wipe out the Nephilim by turning the giants against one another, causing them to slaughter each other in a massive, apocalyptic civil war. And the archangels Raphael and Michael were sent to directly hunt down the leaders of the angelic rebellion. Azazel and Samyaza. The punishment for the Watchers was worse than death. The archangel Raphael was commanded to bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the absolute darkness of the desert, and place jagged, massive rocks over him. Michael was ordered to bind Semyeza and the rest of his corrupted associates. But they weren't thrown into the eternal lake of fire, not yet. The Book of Enoch states they were chained and buried deep within the valleys of the earth, imprisoned in absolute darkness for 70 generations, waiting for the final day of judgment. The ancient gods of the earth were literally locked in the basement of the world. If this sounds like a wild, apocryphal fairy tale that has no place in the Bible, you need to read the New Testament. The early Christians completely believed the Book of Enoch. In fact, the Apostle Peter explicitly references this exact specific event in 2 Peter chapter 2. He writes, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment," and the book of Jude echoes this perfectly, warning of the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling. The apostles weren't speaking in metaphors. They were quoting the banned history of the Watchers. But locking away the Watchers and drowning their giant children created a massive theological plot hole in the Standard Bible. If the rebellious angels are chained in the absolute dark, and the physical bodies of the Nephilim were completely destroyed in the Great Flood, where do all the demons in the New Testament come from? The standard 66 books of the Bible never actually explain the origin of demons. They just suddenly appear in the text, possessing people and wandering the deserts. To find out exactly what these entities are, you have to open another banned text discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees was considered so sacred by early Jewish sects that it was actually carried alongside the Book of Genesis. And Jubilees solves the mystery of the demons with a terrifying biological reality. Because the Nephilim were hybrids, born of immortal angelic fathers and mortal human mothers, their nature was fractured. When the floodwaters rose and drowned their colossal physical bodies, their immortal spirits did not die. But because they were abominations, heaven rejected them, and hell wasn't built for them. The Book of Jubilees reveals that demons are not fallen angels. They are the disembodied, eternally hungry spirits of the drowned Nephilim giants, cursed to wander the earth. And this is where the banned history gets incredibly dark. The Book of Jubilees records a literal courtroom scene in heaven, right after Noah steps off the ark. Noah realizes that these invisible, disembodied giant spirits are blinding and torturing his grandchildren, so he prays to God to bind them in the abyss. The Creator agrees and orders his angels to lock the demonic spirits away. But right as the angels are about to purge the earth of the Nephilim ghosts completely, a terrifying entity steps forward in the heavenly court. His name is Mastema, the chief of the spirits, acting as a satanic prosecuting attorney. Mastema directly challenges the Creator. He argues that human beings are naturally wicked and that he needs an army to test, deceive, and punish humanity. Mastema literally begs the court, "Let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, for great is the wickedness of the sons of men." And in a chilling, suppressed verdict, God agrees to a compromise. The Creator orders that 90% of the Nephilim spirits be locked away in the place of condemnation, but allows 10% to remain on earth under Mastema's control. The Book of Jubilees reveals that every demonic encounter in human history is the direct result of this terrifying 10% clause. If the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees explain the terrifying origin of the Nephilim and the demons of the desert, we have to look even further back to understand the true origin of evil. We have to go back to the Garden of Eden. Just like the mystery of the Nephilim, the standard book of Genesis contains a massive, glaring contradiction right in its opening chapters. If you read Genesis chapter 1, it says that God created mankind in his own image, creating them male and female at the exact same time. But if you turn the page to Genesis chapter 2, the story suddenly changes. Adam is entirely alone, and God has to put him to sleep to create Eve from his rib. For centuries, Mainstream theologians have just dismissed this as two different poetic versions of the same event. But ancient Jewish scholars and mystics knew exactly why those two chapters didn't match. They weren't the same event. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are describing two completely different women. To find the terrifying identity of the woman in chapter 1, you have to look into ancient suppressed texts like the alphabet of Ben Sira and the Zohar. These ancient writings reveal the dark history of the Garden of Eden that the modern church completely erased. Before Eve was ever formed from a rib, Adam had a first wife. Her name was Lilith. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was not created from Adam's rib to be his helper. She was created from the exact same dirt and earth as Adam at the exact same time. Because of this, Lilith believed she was his absolute equal. The banned text describes a massive, bitter conflict breaking out in the Garden of Eden. When Adam demanded that she submit to him, Lilith refused. She argued that since they were both formed from the earth, neither one of them was the master. When Adam tried to force her into submission, Lilith committed the ultimate act of ancient defiance. She spoke the true, ineffable name of God. In ancient Jewish mysticism, speaking the true name of the Creator granted you unimaginable, terrifying, supernatural power. The moment the word left her lips, Lilith was instantly transformed. She manifested wings, violently rejected Adam, and flew straight out of the Garden of Eden, abandoning humanity entirely. She fled to the shores of the Red Sea, a region the ancient texts describe as a hotbed of demonic activity. Adam was left completely alone, and Lilith officially became the first human being to successfully rebel against the divine order. But her story in the banned texts doesn't end with her escape. It ends with a terrifying war. When Lilith spoke the ineffable name of God and abandoned the Garden of Eden, Adam was left completely alone. According to the alphabet of Ben Sira, Adam immediately complained to the Creator, crying out, "Sovereign of the universe, the woman you gave me has run away." In response to this unprecedented rebellion, God did not just let her go. He dispatched 3 powerful angels to act as divine bounty hunters. Their names were Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangeloth. Their strict orders were to track Lilith down, demand her immediate return to Adam, and bring her back to Eden by any means necessary. The 3 angels hunted her down and finally cornered her at the shores of the Red Sea. But this wasn't just any body of water. In ancient Middle Eastern law, the Red Sea was notorious as a breeding ground for dark entities and chaotic spirits. It was here that the angelic bounty hunters delivered God's ultimatum to Lilith: return to Adam immediately. If you agree, all will be well. If you refuse, we will drown you in the sea, and 100 of your demonic children will die every single day. It was a terrifying divine threat, but the angels completely underestimated her resolve. Standing at the edge of the chaotic waters, Lilith looked at the 3 angels and absolutely refused to submit. She told them she had no intention of ever returning to Adam to be his subordinate. Knowing she could not defeat 3 angels of heaven in combat, Lilith negotiated a dark, terrifying bargain. She accepted the curse that 100 of her demonic offspring would die daily. But in exchange, she demanded absolute dominion over human infants. She claimed the power to cause sickness and death to newborn children, 8 days for boys and 20 days for girls. The angels agreed to this chilling compromise under one strict condition. If a human child wore an amulet bearing the names or the images of Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangeloth, Lilith would have no power to harm them. With the dark pact sealed, the angels left her to her fate. From that moment on, Lilith fully transformed. She was no longer just a rebellious woman, she became the mother of demons. She mated with the dark spirits of the Red Sea, including the archangel of death, Samael. The banned texts tell us she became the ultimate night terror of the ancient world, haunting humanity in the dark. With Lilith mating with the entities of the Red Sea and the disembodied Nephilim spirits wandering the deserts, the ancient Middle East became swarming with demonic activity. This brings us to the third massive vault of banned texts, the Demonology Vault. If you read the standard Old Testament, King Solomon is presented as the wisest man who ever lived, a wealthy monarch who peacefully built the magnificent first temple in Jerusalem. But if you look at the ancient texts that the early church violently suppressed, Solomon wasn't just a wise judge. He was a master exorcist, and he didn't build the temple using just human hands. This dark history is recorded in the Testament of Solomon, a first-century Greek manuscript that claims to be the king's own autobiographical diary. The text opens not with a prayer, but with a horrifying supernatural attack. During the construction of the temple, a vampire-like demon named Orneus began terrorizing Solomon's head stonemason. Every night at sunset, the demon would appear, steal the boy's wages, and literally suck the life energy out of his right thumb. Desperate to save his master builder, Solomon locked himself in the temple and prayed to the heavens for a weapon to fight back against the darkness. According to the banned text, God answered. The archangel Michael descended from the heavens and handed King Solomon a magical glowing ring set with a dark stone. Engraved upon the stone was a pentalpha, the seal of Solomon. The archangel gave the king a terrifying directive: use the ring to lock up all the demons of the earth, male and female, and force them to build the temple of God. Armed with this divine ring of power, Solomon confronted the vampire demon, threw the ring at his chest, and instantly bound the entity to his will. The king of Israel had just taken his first demonic prisoner. But Solomon didn't stop with just one. The Testament of Solomon describes the king setting up a literal demonic assembly line. He forces the demon Orneus to summon the prince of demons himself, Beelzebul. Sitting on his throne, wearing the magical ring, Solomon systematically interrogates the dark entities of the ancient world, one by one. He forces them to reveal their secret names, the stars they are associated with, the specific diseases they cause, and the exact angelic names that drive them away. And once he extracts their secrets, he condemns them to the stone quarry, forcing massive, horrific monsters to cut the heavy basalt blocks for the holy temple. As King Solomon sat on his throne wearing the archangel's ring, he didn't just bind generic evil spirits. The Testament of Solomon describes a parade of highly specific, terrifying entities. Beelzebul, the prince of demons, was forced to summon the lords of the underworld one by one to face the king of Israel. Solomon interrogated female demons with the bodies of women and the lower halves of serpents. He bound spirits that manifested as massive three-headed dragons. But perhaps the most horrifying entity brought before the throne was a demon that had no head at all. When the headless demon stood before Solomon, the king was baffled and asked how it could even speak. The demon revealed that it saw the world through its chest and spoke through its shoulders. Its name was Murder. It confessed to Solomon that its sole purpose was to stalk humanity, wait for moments of intense anger, and then slip into the minds of men, forcing them to decapitate their enemies. Solomon, completely unfazed, used the glowing ring to bind the headless demon, forcing it to carry water and lift the heaviest stones for the temple's foundation. But Solomon didn't just interrogate the demons of violence, he interrogated the demons of disease. The king summoned the 36 heavenly deacons, dark spirits associated with the zodiac that cause specific illnesses, from joint pain to blindness. Under the power of the ring, every single demon was forced to confess exactly which physical ailment they caused. More importantly, they were forced to reveal the exact angelic name or spoken phrase that would drive them away. Solomon was systematically extracting the medical and spiritual defense codes of the ancient world. And this is exactly why the early church fathers were absolutely terrified of this book. The Testament of Solomon wasn't just a historical story. It was a literal, functional manual for exorcism and magic. It contained the names, the seals, and the incantations required to command the supernatural realm. If the average peasant had access to this book, they wouldn't need a priest or the church to cast out a demon or heal a sickness. They could just use Solomon's forbidden spells. To maintain their absolute spiritual authority, the church councils declared the book heretical, condemning it as an instructional guide for witchcraft. King Solomon had successfully enslaved the forces of hell to build the temple of God. With the demonic entities securely bound to the stone quarries, he believed he was absolutely invincible. But the Testament of Solomon reveals a terrifying spiritual law. The archangel's ring only maintained its power as long as the king's heart remained pure to the Creator. And Solomon had a fatal weakness. As he grew older, his massive wealth and power corrupted him, and he began taking hundreds of foreign wives who worshipped the ancient dark deities of the Canaanites. The banned text details his ultimate tragic downfall. Solomon fell madly in love with a Jebusite woman. When he asked to marry her, the pagan priest demanded a horrifying price. Solomon had to offer a sacrifice to the dark god Moloch. Blinded by lust, the wisest man on earth took 5 grasshoppers and crushed them in his hands in the name of the pagan deity. The moment the blood stained his hands, the Spirit of God immediately departed from him. The archangel's ring instantly lost its glowing power. The heavy chains of the demons were broken, and the dark entities he had tortured laughed as they fled into the wilderness, leaving Solomon a broken, powerless old man. The Testament of Solomon was buried to hide this embarrassing, magical failure of Israel's greatest king. But the suppression of Old Testament magic was just the beginning of the Vatican's cover-up. As we leave the demonology vault, we have to fast forward in history. If the religious councils were willing to erase the law of the Watchers and King Solomon, what were they willing to do to the New Testament? To find out, we have to look at the greatest, most controversial archaeological discovery of the 20th century, the Gnostic Vault. In December of 1945, an Egyptian peasant was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi. His shovel hit something hard in the dirt, a massive, sealed red earthenware jar. Hoping to find ancient gold, he smashed the jar open. But inside, he didn't find treasure. He found a collection of leather-bound papyrus codices containing 52 ancient forbidden texts. These were the Gnostic Gospels. They were written by early rebel Christians who were hunted down by the Orthodox Church. And the moment scholars translated the very first text, the Gospel of Thomas, they realized it completely destroyed the foundation of the modern Christian church. When scholars finally translated the Nag Hammadi codices, they found a text that the early church had spent centuries trying to burn, the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospel of Thomas doesn't tell a story. There is no birth in a manger, no miracles, no crucifixion, and no resurrection. Instead, it is a list of 114 secret sayings of Jesus. And the very first line of the book comes with a massive, mind-bending promise. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. But as you read the 114 sayings, it becomes immediately obvious why the Orthodox Church outlawed it. In the Standard Bible, salvation comes through the church, the priests, and the cross. But in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus teaches something completely different. He tells his disciples, "The kingdom of God is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known." He explicitly tells them that they do not need a temple or a priest to reach the divine. In saying 77, Jesus says, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." This text completely bypassed the authority of the Vatican. It made the church obsolete. And Thomas wasn't the only disciple to have his gospel suppressed. In 2006, the world was stunned when a highly degraded 1,700-year-old papyrus manuscript was fully authenticated and translated by the National Geographic Society. It was the legendary, long-lost Gospel of Judas. For 2,000 years, Judas Iscariot has been universally hated as the ultimate traitor, the man who sold out the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver. But this banned text completely rewrites the greatest betrayal in human history. In the Gospel of Judas, the disciples are portrayed as ignorant men who completely misunderstand who Jesus actually is and where he came from. Judas is the only one who truly gets it. The text reveals a shocking secret conversation where Jesus pulls Judas aside from the others and tells him the ultimate mysteries of the universe. But the biggest plot twist comes at the end. In this gospel, Judas doesn't betray Jesus out of greed. Jesus actually asks Judas to hand him over to the authorities. Jesus tells him, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Judas wasn't a traitor. He was the only disciple brave enough to help Jesus escape his physical body. But the Gospel of Judas and the Gospel of Thomas were just the tip of the iceberg. The Nag Hammadi library contained texts like the Secret Book of John and the Reality of the Rulers, which revealed a theology so dangerous it could have destroyed the major world religions overnight. These texts claim that humanity has been the victim of a massive cosmic deception. They teach that the angry, jealous, smiting God of the Old Testament, the one who demanded blood sacrifices and wiped out humanity with a flood, was not the true, loving creator of the universe. He was an impostor. The Gnostics believed that the true ultimate God is pure, unknowable light, existing far outside our physical dimension. But according to these banned texts, a tragic accident occurred in the cosmic realms, resulting in the birth of a deformed, arrogant, and blind entity known as the Demiurge. Believing himself to be the only God in existence, the Demiurge created the physical, material world as a massive spiritual prison. And to help him guard this universe, he spawned a legion of terrifying parasitic entities known as the Archons. In these forbidden texts, the Demiurge is actually given a name, Yaldabaoth. He is horrifyingly described as a monstrous deity with the body of a serpent and the face of a roaring lion. Yaldabaoth and his Archons despise humanity because hidden deep within human beings is a divine spark, a fragmented piece of the true, higher God of light. To prevent humanity from realizing their true spiritual power, the Archons trapped these divine sparks inside heavy, physical, mortal bodies. They locked us in the material world. According to the Gnostics, the entire physical universe is essentially an ancient matrix. The Archons act as cosmic prison guards, constantly feeding on human fear, suffering, and ignorance to maintain their control. In this banned theology, salvation has absolutely nothing to do with being forgiven for your sins. Salvation is about achieving gnosis, a profound waking spiritual knowledge. It is the realization that you are a divine prisoner of war. And the early church councils knew that if the masses believed this, the entire religious control system would instantly collapse. As terrifying as the Gnostic Archons were, they only challenged the creation of the material world. But our next collection of banned texts challenged something much more personal, the afterlife. Welcome to the final, most horrifying collection, the Apocalypse Vault. When the early church fathers were compiling the New Testament, they were desperately searching for a text that described exactly what happened to sinners after death. For centuries, one specific book was incredibly popular among early Christians. It was called the Apocalypse of Peter. In fact, it was so widely read that it almost made it into the final Bible. But at the very last second, religious leaders pulled it from the canon. Why? Because the visions inside were simply too traumatic for the public to handle. If you have ever read Dante's Inferno, you are familiar with the terrifying concept of ironic punishments in hell. But Dante didn't invent that idea. He likely drew inspiration from the suppressed Apocalypse of Peter, written over 1,000 years earlier. In this banned text, Jesus takes the Apostle Peter on a terrifying guided tour of the underworld. But hell isn't just a generic lake of fire where everyone burns together. It is a highly organized, bureaucratic nightmare of poetic justice. The text describes a dark, fiery realm where the specific punishment perfectly and brutally matches the specific sin committed on earth. The descriptions in the Apocalypse of Peter are incredibly graphic. Peter watches in absolute horror as those who committed blasphemy against the heavens are shown hanging by their tongues over roaring flames. He sees murderers being cast into a dark pit filled with venomous, immortal reptiles that constantly bite them, while the disembodied spirits of their victims stand by and watch the torment. He witnesses wealthy people who hoarded their money and ignored the starving, now dressed in filthy rags, forced to roll eternally on sharp, burning pebbles. The level of gore and psychological torture described in this text was unprecedented in ancient literature, and that is exactly why the church councils ultimately had to ban it. The Apocalypse of Peter was simply too effective. While the religious leaders wanted people to fear hell, this book crossed a massive theological line. It painted a picture of a God who was not just executing justice, but who had designed a hypersadistic torture chamber. The Muratorian fragment, one of the earliest surviving lists of biblical books, explicitly states that while some churches accepted the Apocalypse of Peter, many leaders outright refused to allow it to be read out loud to their congregations. It was deemed too disturbing for public ears. The book was stripped from the official Bible, and its graphic visions of the underworld were locked away in the dark. If the church was terrified of Peter's visions of hell, they were equally terrified of what the Apostle Paul supposedly saw. In the canonical book of 2 Corinthians, Paul explicitly mentions a man who was caught up to the third heaven and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. For centuries, the Standard Bible left it at that, a massive unsolved mystery. But in the late 4th century, a highly detailed, explosive text began circulating among early Christians. It was called the Apocalypse of Paul, and it claimed to reveal the exact, terrifying secrets that Paul had been forbidden to speak. In this banned text, Paul doesn't just see the final destination of souls, he is shown the exact, horrifying mechanics of death itself. An angel takes Paul and forces him to watch the precise moment a human soul leaves the physical body. But the soul doesn't just float peacefully up to the pearly gates. According to this suppressed manuscript, the moment you die, you are immediately surrounded by two completely different factions of spiritual beings. The text reveals that there are shining, beautiful angels who come for the righteous, and a legion of terrifying, ruthless entities known as the merciless angels. The Apocalypse of Paul describes these dark entities in nightmarish detail. They are the angels of death, the Tartarukian angels. The text says, they have faces that burn like fire, their teeth protrude from their mouths, and their eyes spark like the morning star. They are specifically dispatched to drag the souls of the wicked out of their bodies by force. When a wicked soul is extracted, these merciless angels read all of its sins aloud, tormenting the spirit before physically dragging it down through the cosmic realms into the abyss. It completely shattered the peaceful rest in peace narrative. The Orthodox Church went into a total panic over this book. One of the most famous and powerful theologians in history, Augustine of Hippo, aggressively attacked the Apocalypse of Paul. He argued that since the canonical Bible explicitly said Paul's visions were unutterable, any book claiming to reveal those secrets had to be a dangerous demonic forgery. Augustine and the church councils worked tirelessly to discredit it, successfully banning it from the New Testament. But the damage was already done. The terrifying imagery of the merciless angels and the detailed geography of heaven and hell had already permanently infected medieval literature and art. Did you ever wonder what Jesus was actually like as a child? The Standard New Testament contains a massive, glaring gap in its timeline. We see Jesus born in Bethlehem. We get one brief story of him at the temple at age 12, and then suddenly he is a 30-year-old man getting baptized in the Jordan River. So what happened during those missing decades? For the early Christian world, this silent void was an unbearable mystery. But in the 2nd century, a text emerged that claimed to fill in all the blanks. It was called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, And the stories inside were so wildly controversial, the church councils had no choice but to erase them. The infancy Gospel of Thomas portrays Jesus not as a quiet, obedient carpenter's son, but as a 5-year-old prodigy wielding terrifying, unchecked supernatural power. The book opens with a famous, awe-inspiring scene. The child Jesus is playing by a rushing stream on the Sabbath day. He gathers mud from the riverbank and carefully sculpts 12 clay sparrows. When a strict local leader catches him breaking the Sabbath rules by molding clay, he scolds the child and complains to Joseph. Instead of apologizing, the 5-year-old Jesus simply claps his hands and yells at the mud. Instantly, the clay birds come to life, chirp loudly, and fly away into the sky. Bringing mud to life sounds like a beautiful, innocent miracle. But as the banned book continues, the child's power takes a massive, dark turn. The text reveals a young Jesus who does not yet understand how to control his own intense divinity. In one chilling story, a local boy is running through the village and accidentally bumps hard into Jesus' shoulder. Angry at the disrespect, the child Jesus turns to him and says, "You shall go no further on your way." The text states that the boy immediately collapses and dies on the spot. The villagers are left in absolute terror, begging Joseph to control his son, because anyone who angers the boy is instantly struck blind or cursed. The child Jesus in this banned book is essentially a divine being, struggling to master his immense destructive powers. Eventually, the text shows him maturing, resurrecting the boy he cursed, healing the blind, and learning to use his abilities only for salvation. But for the Orthodox Church councils, this manuscript was an absolute theological nightmare. The Church Fathers, like Irenaeus of Lyon, were desperately trying to build a unified religion around a perfect, sinless, and perpetually mature Son of God. A temperamental, dangerous 5-year-old Jesus completely shattered that pristine image. The Church aggressively labeled the book a heretical forgery and ordered it destroyed, forever sealing the missing years of the Messiah in silence. If the childhood of the Messiah was too controversial for the Vatican, the end of the world was even more heavily policed. Welcome to the prophetic vault. When the ancient Babylonians burned the city of Jerusalem to the ground and slaughtered thousands of Israelites, the survivors were left with a crushing, agonizing question. If we are God's chosen people, why are the wicked allowed to destroy us? That exact question is the beating heart of one of the most powerful, banned, prophetic texts of the ancient world, the second book of Esdras. This text contains visions so intense they rival the book of Revelation, but the church councils ultimately pushed it into the shadows. In this forbidden text, the prophet Ezra does something almost no one else in the ancient world dared to do. He puts God on trial. Standing in the ruins of his civilization, Ezra demands to know why the Creator allows evil empires to flourish while the righteous suffer. In response, God doesn't strike him down. Instead, he sends the archangel Uriel. But Uriel doesn't offer comforting words. The archangel challenges Ezra with impossible cosmic riddles. He tells the prophet, "Go, weigh for me the weight of fire, or measure for me a blast of wind, or call back for me the day that is past." When Ezra admits he cannot, Uriel coldly explains that a human mind incapable of understanding the wind is entirely incapable of understanding the justice of the universe. But the archangel doesn't just leave him with riddles. He pulls back the curtain on the end of days. Ezra is struck with a terrifying apocalyptic vision of a monstrous, 3-headed eagle rising out of a dark, churning sea. The eagle has 12 massive wings and completely dominates the earth, terrorizing all of humanity with its talons. In ancient symbolism, this beast represented the absolute tyranny of the Roman Empire, and by extension, all corrupt global superpowers at the end of time. But suddenly, a roaring lion bursts out of the forest, speaking with a human voice, condemning the eagle for its wickedness before burning it to ashes. So why did the church councils and later religious leaders completely demote this powerful prophetic book? Because it was too dark. Second Esdras contains a chilling, fatalistic theology that religious authorities absolutely hated. In chapter 8, the text explicitly declares that the vast majority of humanity is going to be completely destroyed. It says, "Many have been created, but few shall be saved." It compares the number of the saved to a single drop of water and the damned to a massive tidal wave. This intense pessimism infuriated later church figures. In fact, Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, famously declared that he hated the book of Esdras so much he physically threw it into the Elbe River. While the prophets were having terrifying visions of the end of the world, other banned texts were busy recording the brutal, blood-soaked history of how the ancient Israelites actually survived. If you read the standard Old Testament, there is a massive 400-year historical gap between the book of Malachi and the New Testament book of Matthew. The canonical Bible treats these 4 centuries like absolute silence. But history was not silent. It was defined by ruthless empires, brutal occupations, and some of the most violent, heroic rebellions ever recorded. And the church decided to cut those stories out completely. In the Standard Bible, the greatest warrior heroes are almost exclusively men: David, Samson, Joshua. But in the suppressed Book of Judith, the ultimate savior of the nation is a brilliant, ruthless widow. The banned text sets the stage with the unstoppable Assyrian army, led by a terrifying general named Holofernes, laying siege to an Israelite city. The men of the city are completely broken. They are out of water, out of hope, and agree to surrender to the Assyrians in 5 days. But Judith steps forward, disgusted by their cowardice, and declares that she will deliver the city herself, using a weapon the Assyrians will never see coming: seduction and absolute brutality. Dressed in her finest garments, Judith intentionally walks right into the enemy camp. General Holofernes is so completely captivated by her beauty that he invites her into his personal tent for a private banquet. He drinks himself into a total stupor, planning to compromise her. But the moment the general passes out, Judith makes her move. She grabs his own massive battle sword from the bedpost, grabs him by the hair, and with 2 massive strikes, she completely severs his head from his body. She wraps his bleeding head in a food sack, walks right past the guards, and mounts it on the walls of her city, sending the entire Assyrian army fleeing in absolute terror. So why was the story of the ultimate female assassin removed from the Protestant Bible? Because it didn't fit the neat, sanitized narrative of divine intervention. Judith didn't wait for the sea to part. She took a sword and manipulated her enemy. This same censorship hit the books of the Maccabees. These texts describe a literal, bloody guerrilla war, where a family of Jewish rebels used swords and hammers to slaughter the Greek armies who were trying to force them to worship Zeus. But the reformers threw the Maccabees out because these books contained dangerous theology, like soldiers praying for the souls of the dead. The bloodiest chapters of biblical history were completely erased from the modern canon. We have looked at the terrifying origins of demons and the violent wars of the Old Testament, but what happened to the original 12 apostles after Jesus left? If you read the standard book of Acts in the New Testament, it ends incredibly abruptly. The Apostle Paul is just sitting under house arrest in Rome, and the story just stops. The canonical Bible never tells you how the greatest founders of the church actually died. But the early Christians had entire thrilling volumes dedicated to their final days, known as the Apocryphal Acts. And the most famous of them all, the Acts of Peter, reads less like a religious text and more like an ancient superhero comic book. In the Acts of Peter, the ultimate villain is not a Roman emperor or a Pharisee. It is a dark magician named Simon Magus. Simon actually makes a very brief appearance in the Standard Bible in Acts chapter 8, where he tries to buy the power of the Holy Spirit with money. But the canonical Bible leaves out the rest of his terrifying story. According to the banned texts, Simon traveled to Rome and used intense demonic black magic to convince the crowds and the Emperor Nero himself that he was literally a god in the flesh. He could make statues walk, he could survive being thrown into fire, and he commanded spirits of the air. To break Simon's dark hold over the Roman Empire, the Apostle Peter travels to Rome for the ultimate supernatural showdown. The Acts of Peter describes a massive public spectacle in the Roman Forum. To prove his absolute divinity once and for all, Simon the sorcerer climbs to the top of a high wooden tower. Using his dark arts, he summons invisible demonic entities to lift him up. And in front of thousands of screaming Romans, Simon actually begins to fly through the sky over the temples of Rome. He is hovering in the air, taunting the Christians below. But Peter doesn't use magic to fight back. He drops to his knees in the dirt of the Forum, looks up at the flying sorcerer, and prays a highly specific, devastating prayer. He asks God to command the invisible demons to immediately let go of Simon. The text says that the moment the prayer leaves Peter's lips, the demonic entities drop the sorcerer. Simon Magus plummets out of the sky, crashing violently into the paving stones of the Sacra Via, breaking his legs in 3 places. The crowds immediately turn on him, realizing he is just a mortal man. But the church councils later banned this epic text, fearing that this kind of spectacular, magical duel blurred the lines too heavily between Christian miracles and pagan sorcery. We have covered the horrifying demons of the Old Testament and the supernatural duels of the apostles. But out of all the banned books, there is one that tackles the most important sacred event in Christian history: the resurrection. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the actual moment Jesus wakes up and leaves the tomb is completely skipped over. Mary Magdalene simply arrives on Sunday morning and finds the stone already rolled away. But in 1886, a French archaeologist digging in a monk's grave in Egypt discovered a forbidden manuscript wrapped in parchment. It was the lost Gospel of Peter, and it claimed to have the minute-by-minute eyewitness account of exactly what happened the night Jesus walked out of the grave. According to the Standard Bible, the Roman guards stationed at the tomb were either asleep or paralyzed with fear. But in the Gospel of Peter, the Roman centurion, the soldiers, and even the Jewish elders are wide awake and standing guard in the pitch black. Suddenly, right in the middle of the night, a massive, deafening sound rips through the sky. The heavens literally tear open above them, and 2 unimaginably bright, glowing entities descend from the clouds. The text says, the stone blocking the tomb didn't need to be pushed. It rolled away by itself to let the glowing angels inside. The guards are frozen in absolute terror, watching the entrance of the cave. But what walks out of the tomb next is the exact reason the Orthodox Church banned this book. The 2 glowing angels emerge from the darkness, physically supporting a 3rd figure between them. But this resurrected Jesus is not a normal human being. The banned text explicitly states that the heads of the 2 angels reached up to the sky, but the head of the resurrected Christ completely surpassed the clouds, extending up into the heavens. He's portrayed as an impossibly colossal cosmic giant, and if that wasn't shocking enough, floating out of the tomb right behind them is the actual wooden cross itself. As the giant resurrected Jesus and the floating cross emerge, a booming voice echoes down from the tearing heavens, asking a single question: have you preached to those who are asleep? And in the most bizarre, surreal moment in all of early Christian literature, Jesus doesn't answer. The wooden cross itself speaks. The cross replies to God, yes. To the early Orthodox Church councils, this text was an absolute theological disaster. The Gospel of Peter made Jesus look completely alien, a massive phantom who didn't actually suffer a human death. The church leaders declared it a dangerous docetic heresy, ordered it destroyed, and made sure the true mechanics of the resurrection remained an eternal mystery. We have just walked through the darkest, most heavily guarded vaults of ancient biblical history. From the towering, bloodthirsty Nephilim giants of the Book of Enoch to the terrifying demonic interrogations of King Solomon. We have seen the original rebellion of Lilith in the Garden of Eden, the cosmic prison constructed by the Gnostic Archons, and a colossal, towering Jesus walking out of the tomb, followed by a speaking cross. When you look at all of these banned texts side by side, a massive, terrifying pattern emerges. The question isn't just why they were banned, but what the early church councils were so desperate to protect. The brutal truth is that the early Orthodox Church, heavily influenced by the Roman Empire, was trying to build a unified, controllable, global religion. To do that, they needed a neat, perfectly organized narrative. They needed a God who was strictly in control, a Jesus who was entirely perfect from birth, and a humanity that absolutely relied on the priesthood for salvation. The banned books completely destroyed that control system. Books that taught individual magical exorcisms, books that claimed the physical universe was an evil matrix, and books that showed the messy, chaotic wars of angels and demons were far too dangerous to be left in the hands of the public. So the councils made their lists. They declared what was holy and what was heresy. They ordered the books burned, the temples purged, and the rebel monks silenced. They believed they had successfully buried the supernatural history of the world forever. But the earth refused to keep their secrets. From the pitch-black caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea to the buried clay jars in the Egyptian desert of Nag Hammadi, the sands of time have finally given these texts back to humanity. The 66 books sitting on your shelf today are only a fraction of the story. The rest of the history has been waiting in the dark, waiting for us to finally open the vault. If you made it to the end of this massive deep dive, you are exactly the kind of truth seeker this channel was built for. But we have only just scratched the surface. Every single book we talked about today has layers of forbidden history, hidden locations, and terrifying entities that demand a full breakdown. So I want you to tell me down in the comments, which banned book do you want me to do a full, dedicated documentary on next? While you do that, click the video popping up on your screen right now to see my full investigation into how King Solomon enslaved demons with the Ring of Power. And make sure you subscribe to the Enoch Archives. The truth is out there, and we are going to find it.